All right, today we're jumping into a really fascinating book called The Invisible Gorilla by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons. This book is all about pulling back the curtain on these powerful and, well, often seriously flawed illusions that our minds cook up every single day.
So let me ask you something right off the bat. How much of the world around you do you really see? I mean, really. Most of us, right, we feel pretty confident that we're taking it all in. But what if I told you that feeling of confidence, yeah, that's actually the very first illusion we need to talk about.
And that brings us to maybe the most famous psychological experiment of its kind. The one that actually gave the book its name.
Okay, so picture this. You're watching a short video. You've got two teams passing basketballs around. One team's wearing white shirts, the other's in black. And your job? It's simple, super specific. Just count the passes made by the team in white. Sounds easy, right?
So you're focusing, you're counting, you're on it, you get your number. The person running the experiment asks for your answer, and you give it to them. But then they hit you with a question you totally weren't expecting. But did you see the gorilla? And this is where it gets crazy. About half of the people who do this test, they completely miss it. I'm talking about a person in a full-on gorilla costume walking right into the middle of the game, thumping its chest, and then just walking off. They are so locked in on counting those passes that a literal gorilla, becomes completely invisible.
So this crazy phenomenon actually has a name. It's called inattentional blindness. And this is our first big illusion. It's proof that when we zero in on one thing, we can become totally blind to everything else. It doesn't even matter how weird or obvious it is.
Okay, so think about that for a second. If our attention is that easy to fool in the present moment, what does that say about how we remember the past? Well, that leads us right into our second major illusion, the fact that your memory is basically a liar.
The authors put it perfectly. They say there's this massive gap between what we think we remember and what we actually remember. We'd love to think of our memory as this perfect, high-definition video recording we can just play back. But yeah, the science tells a very, very different story.
And you see this play out in the real world all the time, in some really wild ways. For example, take the famous basketball coach Bobby Knight. He was accused of choking one of his players, a guy named Neil Reed. And when they were both asked about it, they both had these super vivid, super confident memories of what happened. The catch, their memories were completely different. Knight remembered a pretty minor confrontation, while the player remembered a full-blown assault.
And that whole situation just perfectly shows us something huge about memory. It is not a video camera. It's not a playback device. Every single time you remember something, your brain is actually rebuilding that memory from scratch, using little bits and pieces of information. And in that rebuilding process, it can get warped by your current beliefs, how you're feeling, or even new stuff you've learned since it happened.
And folks, that right there is the illusion of memory. It's this deep, misplaced faith we all have that our memories are accurate. And here's the tricky part. The more vivid and emotional a memory feels, the more we trust it, even when it's just as likely to be distorted as any other. All right, so let's recap. Our attention is flawed. Our memory is unreliable. But come on, we can trust confidence, can't we? I mean, if someone acts like they know what they're talking about, they probably do, right? Well, maybe not. And that brings us to our third big illusion.
The book makes a pretty bold claim here. It says that the confidence we see in other people and the confidence we feel in ourselves is very often just that, a feeling. It's not a reliable sign of how good someone actually is at something.
So to put this to the test, the authors went to a chess tournament. And this is like the perfect laboratory for this idea, because every single player has an objective, data-driven skill rating. There's no guessing, no ambiguity. And yet, when they asked the players, the vast majority of them believed their rating was too low, that they were underrated.
Get this, a whopping 75%. 3/4 of them believed they were better than the results proved they were. Their internal feeling of confidence was totally disconnected from the cold, hard facts of their actual skill.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole illusion. We're wired to think confidence equals competence, that it means they're accurate, they know their stuff. But the reality is, a lot of the time, confidence is just a personality trait. Some people are just naturally more confident than others, and it often has almost nothing to do with how skilled they actually are.
And that, my friends, is the illusion of confidence. It's a real double-edged sword, isn't it? On one hand, we tend to overestimate our own abilities,
And on the other, we fall for the confident act put on by others, whether that's a doctor, a politician, or a financial advisor.
So it sounds like our minds are just riddled with these invisible traps, right? So what in the world are we supposed to do about it? Well, this last part is all about figuring out how to see past these illusions.
Okay, let's do a quick recap of the big three we've talked about. First, the illusion of attention, where we miss the gorilla in the room. Then the illusion of memory, where we trust a past that's been rebuilt over and over. And finally, the illusion of confidence, where we confuse a feeling for a fact.
Look, the core message of this whole book is really a powerful warning. The one thing that connects all of these illusions is that we rely way too much on our intuition. We trust our gut, we go with our feelings about what we see, what we remember, what we know. But that intuition, that's the very thing that's leading us astray.
So how do we actually fight back against our own brains? Well, the authors give us a pretty simple game plan. Step one is just to admit it. These flaws are built in. We all have them. From there, we have to start questioning our own certainty, especially when we feel the most sure about something. And finally, we've got to look for outside objective feedback. We need to check our assumptions against reality again and again.
So I'm going to leave you with one final thought. Just knowing about these illusions doesn't magically make you immune to them. But being aware, that is the first and absolutely most crucial step, because it gets you to ask the most important question of all. What invisible gorilla are you missing right now?